Good morning, everyone, and thank you so very much for being here. I'm Jonathan Zor with the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities. Today's program, Unpacking the Census 5 Years Later, is presented as a partnership between the City of Richmond's Office of Community Wealth Building, Initiatives of Change, Hope in the Cities, and the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities. We are also grateful to Dr. John Meiser for his inspiration, his leadership, and his partnership, as well as to the Richmond Times-Dispatch for your hospitality today. I want to take you back in time about 5 years for a few moments. In December 2010, I saw Dr. John Meiser's presentation of data related to race and class in our region at a Hope in the Cities council meeting, and I literally could not sleep that night after seeing that presentation. The next day, I emailed John and members of the Hope in the Cities team to talk about whether we could brainstorm a way to share this information with a larger cross-section of our region and compel people throughout the Richmond region to take some sort of action. The ensuing conversations led to an event on March 18th, 2011, called Unpacking the 2010 Census, the New Realities of Race, Class, and Jurisdiction. Over 200 people were in attendance that day, just down the road at the VCU Student Commons, to hear Dr. Meiser's new presentation of 2010 census data, and Mayor Dwight C. Jones announced the launch of an anti-poverty commission for the city of Richmond. Over the next year, Dr. Meiser's presentation was put onto a DVD. 40 volunteer facilitators were trained by Hope in the Cities and the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities. Over 80 presentations and dialogues were held throughout our region for businesses, healthcare providers, educational institutions, nonprofit organizations, houses of worship, and boards and commissions, not just in the city of Richmond, but also in Chesterfield County, Goochland County, Hanover County, and Henrico County. Simultaneously, awareness and media coverage of the extent of poverty in our region grew, and the Anti-Poverty Commission evolved to become the Maggie L. Walker Initiative for Expanding Opportunity and Fighting Poverty, and now the City of Richmond's Office of Community Wealth Building. Unpacking the Census is a shining example of what can happen when people come together for a common cause. And while we most certainly can celebrate this community collaboration that launched nearly 5 years ago today, we also recognize and acknowledge the work that still needs to be done. And that is what brings us here today. Our program will begin, and you see the agenda up on the screen, following opening remarks from several speakers, and then we will have presentations from Dr. John Meiser and Dr. Thad Williamson, along with some small group conversation to round out our day. Please note that there is a hashtag up on the screen, hashtag UnpackingRVA, as you are thinking about and hearing comments and want to communicate online. Please use that hashtag to stay connected, and we will try and promote as much as we can this event on social media. We will begin with greetings this morning from our host, who is Tom Silvestri, the president and publisher of the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Tom.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. First of all, it's okay that you don't have a name tag in this room, so if anybody has sort of kind of an effect, it's okay. But it's code for by the time you leave, check out somebody you don't know and say hello. That's what we do in this room. When Rob asked us about the availability of this room, we thought for a moment that it might be a public square. But because this initiative has its own identity, we're just the host, and we're honored to have you here. So welcome.
Thank you. We'd asked Tom for brief remarks, and we appreciate that very much. He's a rule follower, apparently.
The only standing ovation I've ever gotten is when I ended a program early. I learned about public speaking then.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom. Next to share remarks, and we are grateful for his partnership and leadership on these efforts, is the Honorable Dwight C. Jones, Mayor of the City of Richmond. Mayor Jones.
Well, thank you so much, and it's good to see all of you. What a wonderful crowd for this issue that we're talking about today. It's good to be here today to see so much interest in addressing one of the fundamental issues that faces society, and it doesn't just face those who are impoverished, it faces us all in a community. I want to thank these organizations for the fine job that they do in keeping us pointed in the right direction. Today is a testament, it is evidence of the difference that citizens can make when we work together with policy makers. 5 years ago this month, I had the opportunity to speak to this group, and it was an opportunity for me to announce the Mayor's Anti-Poverty Commission. The commission consisted of about 50 people, civic leaders and persons from around the city of Richmond, and they were given a Herculean task. They were asked to work together to bring together some strategies, realistic strategies for serious change, because we don't want to come back 20 years from now and still have the same issues of poverty that we have today. And so we've started in Richmond over the past 2 years what we've called the formation of the Office of Community Wealth Building. And this Office of Community Wealth Building has been nationally recognized and has been looked at as a promising model for implementing a holistic approach to poverty reduction, working across key factors such as employment, housing, and education. More importantly, the work undertaken by the Office of Community Wealth Building and its partners has the potential to change the city. And we believe that it has the potential to change our region and the state. Now, Richmond is a resurgent city, but it's not yet a city where everybody is thriving. 1/4 of us live in poverty. That includes 1 out of 5 of every children. We all need to understand that this is not by accident. It's the result of policies, decisions that were made generations ago, intended to cement in place the patterns of segregation that have defined our city's history for far too long. And if we think about it, nobody would create a capital region like that today. If we could start from scratch today, people would be horrified at the idea of creating a region where people are separated by race and class and by economic status. Nobody today would create a region in which almost all the public housing is packed into 1 or 2 areas of the city. Nobody would create a region today where jobs are spread out and where there was no public transportation to be able to get to those jobs. I'd like to think that nobody today would create a region with so many economic and social cards in the deck stacked against us. But that's the challenge that I face as mayor, and every future elected official that will follow me will have the same basic responsibility. Richmond elected officials are going to have to face this. And we've got to determine how to tackle these basic structural problems that have extended severe poverty in our capital city generation after generation. And the problem is so immense that most would shrink from it and say, well, we can't do that. As a matter of fact, for generations prior to this generation, that has been the case. But we're a city that I'm proud to say embraces our problems. We've been deliberate and realistic. We understand that simply throwing money at programs won't work. And so when I created the Mayor's Anti-Poverty Commission, I challenged our citizen volunteers to do simply more than come up with a few recommendations, with a few initiatives or a handful of solutions to problems. Instead, I said, listen, what I want you to do is develop a comprehensive strategy to begin overcoming the structural barriers to prosperity in Virginia's capital city, piece by piece. And you know, that's a real heavy task that was laid on this commission. And it became clear very quickly that it doesn't just work to talk about our problems in the absence of looking at the whole picture. It's not just looking at one part of it. It's about employment, it's about education, it's about better housing, but not just one of those things alone. It's about everything together. We also realized that we could no longer simply wait for help from somebody else. That if we were going to do this, we had to begin by helping ourselves and finding solutions that would make a difference in our city. Our strategy is to figure out how to do better with what we have, both local government and our philanthropic partners. And along the way, we also discovered that it's not quite good enough just to be against poverty. But those of us who are in the room today are here because we are for something. We're for building wealth in communities. We're for building wealth in communities in a way that empowers people, that encourages responsibility, that encourages initiative, and that leads to truly inclusive economic development. And that's what we mean by community wealth building. We also understand that we need to look at our own history. For example, we have a wonderful model in the person of Maggie L. Walker, and I'm proud to say that in just a few short months we're going to erect a statue to her, not on a back street but on Broad Street. I'm very proud of that. And to remind ourselves that this remarkable Richmonder has shown us the way, because at a time when there was little to be had, she recognized the importance of self-help. And finally, we recognize that building wealth and reducing poverty is a long-term proposition. So what's most important is to create a structure and a platform for sustainable change and to build support from every corner of the city among people who are rich, among people who are poor and middle class alike. You see, you can't undo 400 years of history overnight. So we created an Office of Community Wealth Building, and City Council voted to make it a permanent part of government. That means that our Office on Community Wealth Building is codified, and no matter who the mayor is, no matter who City Council is, it will continue to go on and on, because this work is too important just to be identified with one leader, one mayor, or one administration. You really should have clapped right there. We needed a team to lead a coordinated approach tackling employment, housing, and education at the same time. And we needed a team that could promote effective collaboration inside government with our partners in the public school system, the housing authority, and many, many more. We needed a team that could drive positive community change, engaging both grassroots leaders in our neighborhoods and institutional leaders who can make things happen. And so let me say it again. This is not a strategy that aims at marginal change. And we have set big goals because we think big. We've set forth a path to reduce poverty by 40% by the year 2030, including 50% reduction of child poverty. This is a hugely ambitious agenda, but we really can't afford not to be ambitious, because this is a problem that has far too long gone untaken care of. Now let's imagine for just a moment what it will look like in 2030 if we could all take to heart these things that we have proposed. In 2030, let's see a city that is a city where the schools have greater economic diversity, schools where young people are less stressed and better rested. I see a city where parents are working and their homes are stable. I see a city where every kid of modest means grows up not only being told that there is an American dream out there, but they can see the American dream and touch it and feel it, because they live in neighborhoods where people are working and there are examples of success wherever they look. They are able to recognize that this American dream is for them and not just for somebody else. And they'll know it because it's a place where we have established scholarships for them to go to college. It's a place where they can find a job and get there on a bus. It's a place where you can find a job on your own and find support services to help you when you find that job, or get skills when you find that job. It's a Richmond where more people are working and earning, so more revenue is coming in, so that we have more money to supply our needs as a city, from education to infrastructure. And so later on this morning, Thad Williamson, who you all know, who has done a tremendous job. Would you give him a round of applause, please? He's the person that I chose to lead this work on community wealth building, and he's going to fill you in on the details of the work that we have been able to do. But let me summarize what Thad is going to tell you by telling you in brief that what we want to do is to help 10,000 Richmond families get out of poverty, one family at a time. That ambition is stated not as an unrealistic promise, but a challenge to the entire community. How serious we are, in fact, about changing long-standing patterns is seen in the work that we have tried to accomplish. The fact that we now have a dedicated office to fighting poverty is extremely important. And the fact that we have committed to clear goals and established measures of progress is also significant. But we also need to help support engagement, and yes, resources of the entire community, and yes, we need the engagement and commitment of our regional neighbors. I'm happy to see Tyrone Nelson here today and representatives from Chesterfield as well. We have to make that commitment that we can all work together to get this thing done. We have to have the ability to say that we will get it done and get out of the habit of saying, no, we can't do this. You know, Richmond is a hard city to get stuff done in. And sometimes you can be beat back by the naysayers. But the truth of the matter is that there is enough energy. There is a cadre of individuals in this community who feel that this is important, that we can make sure that what we've talked about today is not just a dream, but it certainly is a reality. I believe that when the city and the community unified behind an effort such as this, we can heal our city and we can bring hope to our citizens. And when we look back 20 or 30 years from now, we'll be able to say that we had some hand in creating a better life for the individuals who live here. I came to this city 40 years ago. I want to make it 4, but it was 40. I came to this city 40 years ago to go to college, and the Richmond that we have today is not the Richmond that I found 40 years ago. The Richmond that I found 40 years ago was cliquish, it was segregated, it had no concern for the least and the left out. But I'm here today to tell you that I am so hopeful because of the work that we have done today, that when we look back years from now, there will be individuals who will be grateful to us for allowing us to do this great work so that they can have the kind of opportunity that many of us have been blessed to have. So thank you for allowing me to be here today. I think that there is no greater work that we can be about.
Thank you to Mayor Jones for your vision and your leadership, and we will hear from Dr. Thad Williamson a little bit later on some of the great progress that has already been made and plans that are in the works. We're going to do a slight shift in terms of the schedule, as Reverend Nelson has a few slides we're going to be uploading. Also, folks who are in the back are welcome to come and take a seat, and many of you are using the hashtag, so please make sure that we're keeping the communication going. Unpacking RVA is our hashtag this morning. I'll welcome now to the stage the Vice Chair for the Chesterfield County School Board, Carrie Coyner. Please join me in welcoming her.
Good morning. Thank you for having me today. I am very passionate about the issues, especially of children in poverty. I got on the school board 5 years ago and got on the school board based on my volunteer work in one of our lower income communities within the district that I represent. And just to give you a little framework for who I represent, I'm a lonely dot on the Chesterfield board up there with all the dots. But I represent the entire Jefferson Davis corridor in Chesterfield County. So I represent the majority of families who live in poverty in Chesterfield. So I pick up from the city line, I go all the way to the next city line when I hit Colonial Heights, and everyone in between. But my passion started from really seeing the disconnect. My day job, I am a real estate attorney. And the more I started volunteering in communities and where I worked, there was a huge disconnect of folks that I would interact with in my daily basis in my job in Chesterfield, who I went to church with, who my neighbors were. They had no idea where I was volunteering. They're like, "Where are you volunteering?" I said, it's right down the street from where we live. But we have made it so convenient in our communities as we've developed the suburbs that there is a lot of poverty in the suburbs, but you don't have to see it based on how we've developed our road systems and how we travel and where our jobs are and where our housing is. So the things I am really passionate about, and I think we could do a much better job regionally of working on, and I was joking ahead of time, talking to someone about my kids, and we're getting ready to go on spring break. And they don't have kids in the school system. I said, well, does everybody have spring break at the same time? I said, oh yeah, we plan it regionally together every year so that we don't go to spring break the week before Easter and someone doesn't go the week after. And I thought, well, that's really important to our community, right? That we all do these things together. And we're able to do it. We do it every year. We plan winter break and spring break together and everything in between. So we can do things when we sit down at the table and we believe they're important for our families, right? we've shown we can do it. So taking those examples, the school systems do a great job at it. But number one, I tell folks all the time, helping to improve the economics in our communities is not rocket science, but it's hard, right? It's not rocket science, but it's hard. I deal in commercial real estate all day long for my job. I work with businesses trying to get them to help them locate and purchase their properties and communities. And here's why it's not rocket science, how we improve jobs for people in our communities. Folks looking to bring businesses, look at rooftops, average household income. They want to know that if I put my business right here on this dot on the map, how many people within a 5-10 mile radius can either afford to buy what I'm selling or are educated enough to be employed by me if I locate there. So it's not rocket science, right? You can go buy the Commercial Real Estate Development Handbook just like anybody else, and you can see every business in this country what they want in terms of best possible places to locate. So if we started talking about where we need more job opportunities, we would start working really hard at affecting our average household incomes in those areas. We would 100% focus on if this is the type of businesses that we want located on Jefferson Davis corridor, we would say, all right, how do we push and redevelop our corridor to not push anyone out who's a current resident, but to, over time, improve those average household incomes. Something else I think is a lesson, again, not rocket science, but hard. Our school system does it every day. And my children go to a Title I elementary school, the largest Title I elementary school in the county. 46% free and reduced lunch, 37% of the population is English second language students. And when you look at my child's first grade classroom, I think every day, oh my goodness, in a school this diverse, how does my child's first grade teacher survive? I'm like, survive, not thrive, survive. But she thrives. And here's what they've done. They have said in my child's first grade class, they don't group the highest achieving student in that room with the absolute lowest achieving student in the school. They make sure that people touch, right? So the highest performing students, you need to also have groups in the room that touch the next highest performing students, that also touch the next highest performing. And then you go to the next room and you go, okay, so I've got mid-performing students and they're gonna touch slightly lower performing students, and you're gonna have a mix of folks who you know that it's diverse enough that they're gonna benefit from the diversity of having different folks to help each other, right, in the room. But you're not going to take from one spectrum and completely come down to the other where there's no connection. Our communities, people are afraid. I mean, if we really have an honest conversation, folks are afraid that you're gonna come in and push something completely different into their neighborhood, which is not what we are talking about when we talk about increasing household incomes in each of our communities. We're talking about building communities where different average household incomes all touch each other, where we have neighborhoods that blend. And we have, my goal is that we have an elementary school zone that everyone, regardless of your income, can find affordable housing for them in elementary school zone. So in the county, those are the conversations that we're trying to have. We're trying to have conversations about recognizing that it's been a topic that folks have not wanted to discuss because they haven't had to see it, right? That's the example I started with, that I can drive from my house to work in church and never see poverty. But we're talking about, what if in an elementary school zone, we redeveloped where anyone, regardless of your income, could find housing? Therefore, we could attract any business we wanted to this same attendance zone, and all of our schools would improve throughout the county. So those are the conversations we're having. They need to happen regionally, because where I stop at the Jefferson Davis line, someone else picks up in both directions, right? And our schools are revolving doors there. What's mine today is yours tomorrow, and vice versa. So I think the way we go about it, again, knowing that it's hard work, and if we all sit down at the table together and work at it, it's not rocket science, we can get there, but we have to be willing to have conversations that don't stop at one jurisdiction and pick up on another. And thank you so much for being here and being interested in this conversation. I think I'm turning it over back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We were very intentional in planning today to make sure that this is not a Richmond-specific conversation, and so you'll hear more about that through Dr. Meeser's presentation. I'm going to try to get a few slides up here as we welcome, for some remarks, the Chairman of the Board of Supervisors for Henrico County, Reverend Tyrone Nelson.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I am going to try to fly through 20 minutes worth of slides in 3 minutes.
We appreciate that.
And I purposefully, it's hard following preachers, so I know our mayor was up and I heard him sounding good when I came in, so I left out on purpose so that I wouldn't have to follow.
Yep, you're up.
Thank you, sir.
Yours as well.
Hold on for 1 second, Jonathan, don't go too far. Yes, see if you can move that for me.
Okay.
So clearly, our poverty efforts aren't as extensive and as focused collectively as the city of Richmond. Kudos to the city as they've been tackling poverty now for years. Our model for the rest of us who are seeing the transitions in our own community. Maybe I can just
I'm not getting anything.
yeah, just arrow down and see what happens. All right, well, we're going to try and see how this happens, but we are definitely trying to look at efforts as we notice in our community. We pulled some stats over the last year that show us that over the course of the past 11 years, poverty rates in the county of Henrico have increased by about 4%. So in 2004, poverty rates were around 8%. 2014, we were around 11.5. There's some numbers that go up according to who you look at and where the information comes from that show us around 14 to 15%.
There you go.
The Social Services Department for the state has us around 11% in 2004, and the Central Virginia region around 13.2%. Some of the things that we're doing to try to address or combat poverty really kind of have us focused on our schools and jobs. That's what we're doing as a county each year when we look at our budget and we look at our economic development, trying to make sure that we have jobs for our citizens and to make sure that we are investing in our schools. And so you see here, economic development is important for us. We have our business hub out in Innsbrook. We have a tech park out in Eastern Henrico and Sanson that we are constantly recruiting, putting a lot of money into our EDA, which is trying to bring businesses in. All of the jobs that we lost during the recession, we have recovered. And so we're trying to make sure that we are focusing on bringing jobs and then also focusing on strengthening our workforce. And so we are not just a fiscal agent of the Capital Region workforce, but we also are a vital part of what's going on. We small part of what is happening with BRT, an investment of about $400,000 in comparison to the city and the state. Doesn't seem like much, but with our small investment, we do show that it's important for us to be a part. There also in the future will be some conversations about expanding our job, our GRTC bus line from where it stops now, which I think is Pemberton, which is where the Costco is up in West Henrico, and trying to expand it out into Short Pump. So those are real discussions that we're having now. But again, just showing you our general fund increase over the past since '06, about $336 million now, over $100 million more for fiscal year 17, which we'll be voting on that on April 26th. Again, some school improvement opportunities for us, things that we focus on, trying to keep our classroom sizes small, focusing on intervention, school improvement, and then utilizing whatever kind of grant funds that come our way. I've already shared we recovered all our jobs lost since the economic downturn. Second highest number of jobs of any locality in Virginia, and then again a part of workforce development efforts. $6 million annual cost associated with mass transit, $400,000 toward the BRT. We were very much, particularly in the western part and eastern Henrico, still rural to a certain degree. We've had to begin to invest in our infrastructure as Western Henrico is becoming has become an urban community. And so 3.3 miles of sidewalk is we're trying to create an urban environment which will help us expand our transportation efforts. Focusing on continuing to make sure that our police and fire are top tier. whether it's through our libraries or infrastructure in the government buildings that we have, focusing on our current technology, culture and parks, tax relief for elderly and disabled, also making sure that we're committed to a number of our outside agencies and supporting what they do as well. Over the course of the past 4 years, we committed to adding 10 new police officers each year. We're in the 4th year of that, so current budget will add 10 new officers. We believe that the more officers we have on the street, the better trained they are. Clearly, you can see a decrease in crime, by almost half since 1975, kind of leveled over the last 5 years. Trying to strengthen our parks and recreation systems and make sure we have a balanced park system throughout the county. It gives our citizens opportunity to just learn, not only learn, but play. The Living Mill Library we just opened up is a state-of-the-art library, and we're opening up the Verona Library, which will be the best government structure ever created. June 1. So we're excited about that. 40,000 square feet for Verona. That's the first government building we've opened new in some years, and so we're really amped about that. We're focusing on making sure that we fund our public health efforts, and so clearly you can see here that we're making sure that our maternity programs are invested in. I've already mentioned REAP, which is our real estate advantage program for elderly and disabled. Each citizen can qualify up to about $3,000 in tax relief. Some things that we invest in on the regional level to kind of combat and fight poverty, homelessness, et cetera. You see the list here. Many things that the city of Richmond also funds, maybe even at a greater level. Trying to make sure that we have diverse housing opportunities. About a quarter of our housing opportunities are apartments, about 70% residential and 30% commercial split when it comes to our tax base. Again, for us, poverty begins and ends with education, and that's where we invest most of our money. 56 cents out of every dollar that a taxpayer gives and spends, whether it's through personal property or whatever, goes to education in Henrico County. These are some of our allocation efforts that are going on in our new budget. And wow, I might have did that in 5 minutes, but that's Henrico County in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Chairman Nelson. We are grateful to be able to have a broader conversation today, and to help us continue to think about these things. In a moment, I'm going to invite up the person who really catalyzed and has been the visionary for the work of unpacking the census for over 3 decades in the Richmond region. And it has been his research and his passion and dedication and leadership and example that have brought us to this point. So please join me in giving a warm and enthusiastic welcome to Dr. John Meeser.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you all for coming to today's presentation. I'll be introducing 2 superb students from the University of Richmond shortly. I could not do this work without bright students like Taylor and Olivia. Most of my career has concentrated on race and politics and how African American communities in the urban South, particularly Richmond, Atlanta, and Memphis, evolved into separate cities. Shortly before I retired at VCU, however, I began to give more attention in my scholarship to poverty, which of course is part and parcel to race and political power. But I've been troubled about poverty ever since I was a kid, growing up in a highly segregated city on the Texas High Plains, Lubbock. For the longest time, I wasn't even aware that there was a second Lubbock. For one thing, it was separated from the rest of Lubbock by railroads and a state highway. It was literally on the other side of the tracks. That's where paved streets turned into dirt roads minus curbs, gutters, and street lights, and where houses were small and looked like some of the backyard forts I used to make with scrap lumber. My family and other white families never went there unless you were looking for a maid to clean the house or day laborers for construction or farm work. Segregation formally began in Lubbock in 1923 when the Lubbock City Council adopted an ordinance that required black people to live south of 16th Street and east of Avenue C because, among other reasons, places where colored people lived are, and I quote, dangerous to health and pollutes the earth and atmosphere, end quote. Now, while that ordinance was unenforced for many years after desegregation, it was not formally repealed until just 10 years ago, in 2006. Between 1953 and 1965, Dunbar High School, the only black school in Lubbock, won 5 state basketball championships. Yet I never heard of even one of those state championships when I was in high school. Many of the black and Latino communities in Lubbock were later destroyed by highways and urban redevelopment, the same civic projects that destroyed so many neighborhoods here in Richmond. But as civic boosters in Lubbock and Richmond often said, progress sometimes meant that some had to make sacrifices in order to do what was best for the city as a whole. It's strange, however, that in both cities, what was deemed the public good always redounded to the benefit of white people with plenty of money and lots of connections. 6 years ago, I decided to study poverty through the lens of race and political power, and it ultimately led to an experience unlike any other in my 46-year career. When I first started to mine census data and to make public presentations about poverty, the overhead projector was the technology of the day. I made dozens of tables and charts, copied them onto transparencies, and projected them on a screen or most likely a wall. And with the advent of PowerPoint, computer-generated graphics were the most compelling. They were far more compelling than transparencies. Plus, PowerPoint was technology that even old people like me could use. But today it's all about GIS, or Geographic Information Systems. For that, I turned to specialists who used it all of the time. University students. My student assistants over the years have really been exceptional, and the 2 assistants this year are exceptional among the exceptional. And with the aid of GIS technology, I began to develop a 3-part program on poverty. The first part consisted of census data. The second part was the story behind the concentration of poverty. The third part focused on action, namely, what are we going to do? And what are we going to do now about poverty in Richmond and the surrounding counties? And with the development of the 3-part program, what started out as a 20-minute presentation grew to an hour minus discussion. With discussions, programs were often 2 hours. Yet the number of requests kept growing. I was invited by public officials, business executives, heads of nonprofit organizations, leaders in the faith community, and neighborhood-based associations to speak and lead discussions about the concentration of poverty, why it happened, steps that needed to unite the public and private sectors in a joint effort to build wealth and reduce poverty. My wife Sharon couldn't find me for a couple of years. There was evidence that I'd been at home, like dirty dishes put in the dishwasher, after a late supper and a cereal bowl in the morning before I left for school. And then one day, Jonathan Zuer of Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities and Rob Corcoran of Hope in the Cities asked what I thought about the two organizations getting together to make a DVD of my three-part presentation and then training facilitators to present the video and lead discussions. I was speechless, which is pretty rare for me. They had a sidewalk bake sale and raised a little money. And about this time, I met Kevin Geraldo, a seasoned videographer at the University of Richmond, who made promotion films for the university and did a lot of work for Ed Ayers. He became very interested in the slides and said he would be happy to make the DVD for reduced cost. Really reduced cost, just enough that the bake sale could cover. And upon completion of the DVD, which was entitled Unpacking the Census, Hope in the Cities and the Virginia Center sponsored a conference that filled one of the VCU ballrooms. That's when the two organizations announced the completion of the DVD and set out a call for people who were interested in serving as facilitators to attend a weekend retreat in Richmond Hill, hoping to recruit 25, maybe 30 people. Over 40 people showed up. That included representatives from faith organizations and advocacy groups, as well as educators, small business owners, and government employees. Area organizations were notified about the DVD and the availability of trained facilitators to lead conversations. Biracial teams were formed, and so that when a group asked for a showing of the video, the team would show up with the DVD and lead a discussion. Over 1,000 people attended 65 presentations. The Kellogg Foundation funded an impact analysis of the presentations that was conducted by program evaluator Dr. Bonnie Dowdy. The report indicated that the presentation increased people's knowledge about the impact of poverty in the Richmond region and the significance of local history on current patterns of policy. Moreover, the analysis revealed that the presentations led to increased support for public policy interventions. Many of you here today, and I see many of you, were facilitators. Many of you attended the discussions. You are the ones who awakened the public that poverty was both a city and a county issue. And then another convocation was held. And because a large turnout was expected, we really wanted Mayor Jones to be there with us, and indicated that this would be a wonderful time to announce the formation of an anti-poverty commission. He came, and he did. And it was at this convocation that Mayor Jones launched the Anti-Poverty Commission. Where are we 5 years after the blitz of presentations and discussions? It's too early, of course, to expect any measurable results, such as a significant drop in the poverty rate. But we do have an Office of Community Wealth Building, the first such office of any locality in the United States. That in itself is impressive. It's the brainchild of an organizational genius, Dr. Thad Williamson. The office is working around the clock and is making progress, as you'll hear shortly, from Dr. Williamson. The question today is this. The city has taken action, but when will the counties join this effort to reduce poverty? When will the Office of Community Wealth Building become regional? And it's at this point now I want to turn to the latest data about poverty in the Central Virginia area. This information was released in December. I use only the 5-year estimates from the U.S. Census Bureau, not the 1-year estimates or the 3-year estimates, only because the 5-year estimates have the lowest error margin. And the 5-year estimates, as a result, I think are a better measurement of what really is happening. So you're seeing this for the first time, and but since you've seen the last presentation, there are a lot more student-produced GIS maps. And before I get this underway, I do want to introduce the 2 students who've been so helpful this year. And I want them to stand. Taylor Holden. Taylor graduated from the University of Richmond in May 2015 with a BS in Geography and Environmental Studies. He currently is the GIS technician for the Spatial Analysis Lab at the University of Richmond, where he interned 3 years as a student. He's interested in pursuing a career in urban planning or environmental management with a focus on applications of geospatial analysis. And the second student, Olivia Mabayad. She's a senior at the University of Richmond, majoring in geography and leadership studies. She works as an intern at the university's Spatial Analysis Lab, where she assists with introductory courses and prepares maps and spatial analysis for faculty research. And I'm pleased to announce that next fall she will be attending Penn, where she'll start work on her graduate degree in urban and regional planning. So with that, let the show begin. I'm going to start out by talking about a few of the slides, and then I'm going to turn over the rest to these really wonderful and very bright students. But first of all, as I have with all of the presentations, as many of you will remember, we need to start with an understanding of what the Census Bureau defines as poverty. And I'm using the 2014 thresholds. I think I'll use a PowerPointer that may be a little easier. 2014 thresholds only because the 5-year estimates cover the years 2009 to 2014. So I'm using the estimates that would correspond to this data package. And for a family of 4 to be considered by the Census Bureau as poor, that family cannot have more than, for a year, $24,230. And for an individual under the age of 65, no more than $12,316. And for people 65 years and older, $11,354. This is very low, way too low. It does by no means capture the extent of human suffering. And in just a moment, I'll share with you another slide that will give you a more accurate idea of the kind of deprivation we face here in metropolitan Richmond. Let's start first with just the percent poverty. We can look at 1990 all the way to 2014, and many of you who have seen these presentations in the past will, this is the same slide, just new data, new column, 2014, the red is still the city of Richmond. And if we start with the city of Richmond, today the poverty rate is 25.5%. We can't say exactly again because this is where the margin of error kicks in. But it's safe to say that, if we look at, we could start here in 2010 and go all the way over here to 2014's, 25, 26, gets close to, if you round up, to 27 in 2012, dips a little bit more. But you could say pretty much it's been a steady rate of high 20s. It's really not changed. The counties, meanwhile, if you look at Chesterfield County, the poverty rate has gone up, and that is statistically significant. 2013, it was 6.74%, 7.23%. In 2013, 6.7, 2014, 7.2. If we take a look at Enrico, it was about the same, and actually it's been roughly the same for about 3 years. Now, this is the slide that I want to discuss for a moment. I indicated that the poverty rate as defined by the Census Bureau is way too low. Some organizations will actually double the poverty rate. I know that there are national organizations that focus on child poverty that will do that. Will double the poverty rate to get a better sense of the extent of human need. Not long ago, and many of you will recall my saying this, the University of Virginia, specifically the Weldon Cooper for Public Service, did a statewide study of poverty in the Commonwealth. And what they found is that for a family of 4 to have what they called a self-sufficient income, that is to say, enough income to get by. But if one of 3 events was to happen, the family would crash. One of those events would be a lost job. Another one would be a divorce. And a third one would be a major health crisis. If they were able to avoid a catastrophe like that, they could get by for a family of 4 with an income of $45,000. But that is just a self-sufficient income. I thought it would be interesting to see what percent of all 4-person families in each of the localities here in Central Virginia would have just the bare minimum. And by the way, to be eligible for free and reduced fare lunch, a family of 4's income must range from 0 up to $44,863. So essentially, and by the way, when you look at census data, you can't get it right down to 44,863. You have to use the categories that are available, and so the best we could do is get it to 45,000. But at any rate, when you're talking about a family with self-sufficient income, they are eligible for reduced fare lunch. Now, this is really shocking. If you look at the city of Richmond, 54% of all of the families, all of the 4-person families that live in the city of Richmond, the capital of Virginia, are eligible for reduced fare lunch in school. Meanwhile, Chesterfield County, 28%, that's over a quarter of all of the families in Chesterfield. In Rocco, 36%, that's over a third of all of the four-person families in Enrico County. That's shocking. It's remarkable. And I'm afraid that so often we, as we should, pay attention to those who are officially declared poor. But if we do that only, we're overlooking a huge proportion of our fellow citizens who are facing financial hardship, and in many cases, certainly those families that earn less than $45,000. What about families that earn $35,000, $25,000? It's rough. It's barbaric to just try to get through one day to another. And then child poverty, again, we're just using census data now. In Richmond, as it has been now for the past, goodness, you can see the year beginning 2010, 38.7, went up to 40.5, this is today 39.5. Basically, you can say that 40% of all of the children in the city of Richmond live in poverty. And remember now, we're talking about the census definition of poverty. 40%. It's at this point that, and one other thing before I turn it over to the two students. Households that are headed by single women, often that is another indicator of where you can see high levels of poverty. And then when you look at that category, you'll see that in Richmond, 13.5% of all households headed by single women live in poverty, and you can see pretty much how it stacks up in the other jurisdictions. When you look at poverty growth, and let me explain what I do, because a lot of people say, oh, well, you can fudge the numbers, you can make it look any way you wish. Let me explain how this was determined. I simply looked at the number of people living in poverty at one point in time, took another point of time and looked at the number of people living in poverty, subtracted, and developed a percentage. Very straightforward. And by doing that, you can see, for example, that in Enrico County, between the years 2000 and 2014, poverty has increased 73%. Chesterfield, 59%. Hanover, 51%. To the point now, and as many of you already know, most of you, that most people living in poverty reside today in the suburbs rather than the city. But what keeps changing is the percent of all people in poverty living in the suburbs. This percent, which is now 57%, just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And this is the reason that we can't stop an anti-poverty campaign with just the city. It won't work that way. And to make this even more apparent, we now turn to the GIS maps, and I'm going to turn this over to Taylor and to Olivia, and I think we have another microphone someplace. Maybe I'll
Hello everyone, I'm Taylor. We're going to get to the mapping portion now. So this first series of maps is the poverty rate in the Richmond region, and we're just using the 3 counties of Chesterfield, Henrico, and Richmond City. And so we're going to go from 1990 to 2014. And so, as you kind of saw in that animation, the poverty historically has been concentrated within the city of Richmond, kind of in the East End area. But over the years, we see it spread out into the counties far more. So you see Eastern Henrico and even parts of Western Henrico, and then along with Northern Chesterfield, right along the border with the city of Richmond. And even to 2014, we've seen the rate increase fairly dramatically from 2010. We see another pocket kind of popping up around Charles City and the Tri-City area down here, as Carrie was talking about earlier.
Okay, so as, excuse me. So as you all can see, poverty within Richmond is largely black, 57%. But keep in mind that these numbers over here on the right of the screen tell another story as well. So of all whites, 17.8% live in poverty, and of all blacks, 32.1% live in poverty. All of these numbers are incredibly high right now, so it's not just black population that lives in poverty, it's a large proportion of all races.
And we see the same thing in the surrounding counties as well. So in Henrico, a larger percent of the poor population is white at 37%, but we see that still only 7.4% of the white population lives in poverty, compared with the black population, 17%. And Latinos in Henrico, a quarter live in poverty as well.
With a larger proportion of all of But the larger proportion of all of the poor in Henrico County is African American at 42%.
In Chesterfield, we see that actually 51% of the people living in poverty are white. Chesterfield has a much larger white population compared to the other two counties that we're considering. But when we look here, we also see a much larger percentage of the population that is Hispanic and Latino living in poverty. And their poverty rate is actually lower in Chesterfield than the surrounding counties, but they make up a larger percentage of the total people living in poverty in Chesterfield. So this is a map. We actually borrowed the methodology from the Weldon Cooper at UVA. They call it a one-dot, one-person map. And so we've taken the census data and mapped race over the region to kind of see where people live. In the past, when we were doing these presentations, we had each race mapped separately, and it was kind of hard to see the patterns kind of overlapping and see it all at once. So with this map, we have the white population in blue, the black population in green, Asian population in red, and Hispanic and Latino in orange. And so what we've done here is also kind of punched out the areas where people don't live. So the commercial areas, the industrial areas, the water, you can see the river running through. And so this really helps concentrate and show where people actually live. So down here in Chesterfield, you see it's a lot of agricultural land, and the people are actually concentrated up closer to the city. It's where most people live, and that population density is higher. And we see, when you look at the race, the African American population is concentrated in the East End, Richmond, extending into Henrico, and then also on the south side, whereas we see it's pretty dramatic.
So what we wanted to do was show you what races live in what poverty level. So this is just the city of Richmond right now, and as you can see, the choropleth, the darkness in the back, represents the level of poverty. So you can see areas up in the west area, far darker, the east area, far darker, while in the areas in the west are far lighter. You can also see that the blue Circles, which represents the white population, is in the west, and circles that are far more green are in the east. It's also good to point out that lower down south, there is a higher portion of Latinos.
And looking at Henrico County with the same map, we see once again the white population concentrated in the western part of Henrico, kind of Short Pump area as well. We see a lot of the Asian population that's around there. And then when you look at the east end, once again, African American. And for Chesterfield, we see once again kind of as it showed in the larger regional map, you have kind of this concentration of African American and Latino larger population, and then this concentration of the white population kind of out west.
So as we heard from previous people during this whole conversation, another way to measure the success of any area within the city or the counties is by median household income. It's a very important variable. So here is the median household income for 1990. We're going to go through 2000, 2010, 2014. You can see that within the past 14 years, there's been a very large increase in the low household income areas within the center of the city, but it's also radiating to the counties as well.
And we see this concentration of high income kind of along this 288 runs right here. It's kind of been a border in a lot of the maps that we've noticed. Kind of higher poverty in this area, higher household income below 288. And lastly, unemployment is the last measure that we look at. So poverty, income, and unemployment. So we'll take you through unemployment from 1990 to 2014. These classes, 5% is the national average currently. So we did below the national average, and then twice the national average. So after 2008, I'm sure you all can imagine, with the financial crisis, lots of people lost jobs, and we saw this giant jump to basically, almost half the region over that 5% of the national average. And to this day, it's been increasing despite many of the improvements that the economy as a whole has made. Richmond and the region as well has kind of lagged and increased that unemployment rate.
So now we'd like to take some time to hear your thoughts. If you all have any questions for us on how we made these or any kind of implications of these maps, we'd love to hear about it.
Before we start that, John, how much time now do we have for discussion?
You've got about 20.
Oh, okay, fine. We've got
15,
plenty of
15.
time. Okay, good. The way we're dividing this. Jonathan, you're going to do this. Oh, great, please. I'm just going to say, the way we've divided this, simple questions come to me, harder questions come to you later. Jonathan, did you want to leave? Okay, well, have at it. Questions or observations? Yes.
Simple question. Are these maps available online? Your presentation is
Yes,
online?
we will make them available. In fact, always after a presentation, I want everyone who attended to have access to these maps. And so what you've seen today, Jonathan will make them available to you and Hope in the Cities. And I assume by going to either one of the websites that you can get access to the maps. We want you to have access to these maps. Yes.
If we have your email from your RSVP, we can send them out.
Oh, yes, Amy.
Just to say, we can also put them on the University of Richmond Scholarly Depository, which is part of the library, so they'll be there always, and you can go back. We have some of John's other outstanding research there over the past few years, so I direct you there as a permanent place to find this important research.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned that, Amy.
If you go to the University of Richmond Libraries page, it's the UR Scholarship Repository, you can search by Dr. Beezer's last name and you can find these things. It will probably take us a couple weeks, or maybe a week or two for our librarian friends to get them up. But that's a place you can find a whole body of John's recent work on reading.
Right, yeah, thanks for mentioning that. That's, anybody can go to the University of Richmond website and to the library specifically, and then as Amy indicated, you can, so you've got quite a repository on the library website of the University of Richmond of maps, tables, charts, and whatnot. So please use this material. That's exactly why we did it, is so if you can make use of it, or you'd like to show this information to groups you're part of, we really encourage you to do it. Other questions? Yes?
Hi, thank you for doing this presentation. I just assumed, did you do any multivariate analyses on these variables on its impact on poverty? If yes, then what was the main variable that came out as the number one thing that was causing poverty? Would it be unemployment?
We did not. We've not done that kind of analysis. It would be an interesting analysis to do. Let me ask my colleague Thad if you've seen a multivariate analysis of poverty for Central Virginia, or if you would like to use multivariate analysis, see how it works and what you can learn, whether there has been such studies elsewhere in the United States.
This is not the question I was expecting to get today. But the census data, you don't get the data with individual level factors. It's all aggregates. So any kind of sort of regression analysis is going to be suspect. You could do sort of community level correlations. When we did the Anti-Poverty Commission report, we did find that underemployment was the most reliable predictor of poverty status, and then education would be second, and probably race third. But that's not exactly technically answering what you're asking. But the census data alone doesn't allow you to do that kind of analysis. You'd have to get to a different data set. Robert Rank is someone who's done work of that kind, and there's a website called riskcalculator.org. You can look at it, you can plug in your demographic information and find out your likelihood of being in poverty over the next 5, 10, or 15 years. So that would be a closer answer to what you're talking about.
Do you have a question for one of these students? Yes.
On the household income map, can you flip back to that? Yes. There seems to be like a phenomena across southern, well, you pointed it out, the 2014 map there with that. How much, can you tell how much of that could be people displaced by increasing prices of homes in that swath? When you look at it from, that's a pretty major shift across those eras.
I'm glad we have Karen.
Yeah.
She is the expert when it comes to the county.
It's not displacement in that area, that's new growth in Chesterfield. It's the areas that have been undeveloped. It's one of the things I talk a lot about and get in trouble a lot about from talking about, but we incentivize upper income households to move to Chesterfield. We've developed a land development system in our county whereby if you're wealthy, you can afford to buy a new home, and if you're not, you can't. And so what you're seeing are brand new neighborhoods that are all upper income neighborhoods. When the baseline to develop a lot in Chesterfield before you even buy land is $50,000. Before you even buy the land for a house, the baseline that you have to pay to the county for the privilege to move into Chesterfield, you've just swapped out and wiped away a huge portion of households that can afford to build. So what you're seeing on that side of 288 in northeastern Chesterfield, which is where I live, that lonely town on the map back there, we call it the mountain because you have to cross the mountain, you go somewhere else. On our side over here, you're not seeing the same number of new households. So it goes back to my point, if you're looking at driving average household incomes, we have an entire we have this entire corridor, which is where I live, and that needs additional average household incomes. And so how do we change our land use policies to incentivize mixed income housing? And there are ways you can do that without displacing folks, right? So again, going back to that formula, if you look at in Chesterfield today, if our poverty rate is 30%, then I think a real good goal would be that no elementary school zone has more than 30% of its population living in poverty. Because then you can really start saying, okay, well then what do we need to drive and push policy, housing here, and jobs here to make that work? And so it gives you a formula where your goal is not to eliminate poverty completely, because we won't, right? Our goal is to make sure that we have jobs in place where folks can be able to move up. That's how we impact those poverty rates in the areas, that folks have job opportunities to move up an income bracket through education and jobs within their community. If the education and jobs are on the other side of the mountain and you don't have transportation and you can't live there, it really doesn't mean anything to you if you live on the other side of 288. And so those are the things that if we're going to look at, again, cooperation, it would be everyone divides up the jobs and housing and opportunities throughout not just Chesterfield, but the region, really.
Yeah, and just to jump onto that, one of the things we're looking at in some future series of maps is kind of the way that kind of wealthier families do move away from the city as kind of poverty increases, and we kind of see that right there. But we're actually going to look at commercial activity and kind of where are these commercial centers. Because people, they're willing to have commutes, but there's kind of a barrier they hit where, they're not going to commute 2 hours or something. So kind of where these commercial centers are. So right down here, there is a lot of activity going on. But then when you look up at Henrico County, there's Short Pump. And so it's kind of become almost like a little satellite city where people get all those amenities so they can live farther from the central city, whereas Chesterfield, eventually there's kind of going to be just farmland, and they're going to have to keep developing in order to, if people want to continue moving further.
Also, this is where discussion about regionalism is very, very important. As long as we have 3 independent localities, it's going to be very difficult. But just say, for example, that these three jurisdictions were one. What Taylor's referring to is when do high-income families get to the point as they move out that they hit a wall. And by that, the wall is if there's not any commercial development, and then they have to drive farther and farther away to buy their groceries or to fill up the car or whatever it might be, then that is going to pretty much constrain even wealth moving farther away. But as long as we have 3 separate jurisdictions, each is wanting to increase its own tax base. And particularly this is a concern in Chesterfield County because there's not as much commercial taxable property, as is the case in Henrico County. And by the way, in Henrico County, Tyrone, as you know so well, with Short Pump now, that who knows where the wall is likely to be. I mean, people are going to move farther and farther out into Goochland County. They already are. But in Chesterfield County, this is going to be kind of a test, I think, in many ways, Carrie, is whether the government, it does need more commercial tax base to try to keep the property taxes on people as low as possible. But do you think there is growing attention now to commercial development out here?
There's a lot of retail commercial. We focus in Chesterfield. I live right next door, literally, right next door to Amazon. So I live next to an industrial park. And so one of the things that we've realized, we're looking for a new elementary school site out in our area right now. And everywhere we turn, it's industrial property only, which means we have a lot of folks when they're looking at opportunities of where to live and where to work, and where to place schools and retail and commercial. We've really, in this whole corridor along the Jeff Davis Highway, We're in the middle of redoing the plan right now, so show up and speak at those meetings. But we've really sort of put folks in a bubble as far as what's called for uses in our area, and it's very high industrial. We sort of decided this end of town is going to be the industrial sites. Well, it's great overall for the county, but not always so great for the folks who live around it, right? Because I don't want another Amazon. And I'll be honest, every day when I drive with traffic, it's majority very low income paying jobs, right? I want opportunities for folks to get a better, higher paying job. So when you look at the opportunities, you're going to continue to see retail, right? Because retail follows household income, rooftops, right? As does industrial, but you're going to keep seeing the development of more and more commercial. My worry is we'll end up with the same thing in the West as where Short Pump is, where it's its own little satellite city where you can get all of your shops and services and it's fun to live there. Same thing out West, but we're not developing land uses in northern, eastern Chesterfield that allow for the same live, work, play. You know, we follow that philosophy. Everybody deserves to live, work, play wherever they are. That should be what drives some of these land use decisions. And I've used these maps out in community meetings in Chesterfield. In Chesterfield, we haven't talked a lot historically about poverty. We just ignore it. And so the first, it's just true. So the first baby step, if you're someone in the room who's like, well, how do I, if you're in Chesterfield, you don't have to raise your hand because you don't want to admit it. But if you're in Chesterfield and you want to have these conversations, the first step is conversation, right? For folks to see it. So these maps are a great tool. But I will warn you, you need to uplift and praise the people who live in the areas that we're talking about are concentrated in poverty. Because I had a woman who came up to me after one of the conversations, she's like, well, now I wonder if I should move, because I can afford to move. Should I move, you know, somewhere else? So be real careful when you're out in the community. It's important we praise people who have the mobility and the ability to lead, and they don't, right? So it's very important we praise our community and our members who choose to stay and improve things. So just be mindful of that when you're out in the community and utilizing these maps that we encourage and praise folks who are still living there.
Yes, there's a question here.
Go
ahead.
I was just, the migration of poverty to the counties, to what extent is it being pushed by gentrification in the city of Churchill, Jackson Ward, and many of those areas, and the movement into the city of many younger, affluent people who...
Oh, I'm glad you raised that question, Barbara. In fact, I just overlooked that. I should have mentioned it much earlier. If we'll go back to one of the first tables that showed the poverty rates for each of the, in that table, 8 localities. By the way, those are the localities minus Ashland that comprise the Richmond Regional Planning District. That I noted that the poverty rate is essentially flat. But if you look at the rate and look at previous rates, you could see that, but again, I don't want to make too much of this, but nevertheless, there's been a dip in the poverty rate in the city of Richmond. That I would maintain is due in all likelihood to gentrification, precisely the thing that you're referring to. And you really see it in North Churchill, other neighborhoods as well. And we already know, I recognize a lot of people here who are part of affordable housing organizations. This is a pretty tight community. The organizations get together a lot. And I'm really glad to see these organizations working much more closely together. But those who are aware of what's going on the ground, and I see some right here who live in North Churchill and who are not part of the gentrifying population. And in fact, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about where you're from. She represents Urban Hope.
Hi, everyone. John, you kind of put me on the spot here. So my name is Shekinah Mitchell, and I am a very proud resident of Churchill, love my neighborhood, graduate of RPS. And I actually wear two hats. So a lot of you guys know me here from VCU. I'm working with youth development and quality improvement, which is the education side of things. But living in Churchill, I just could not stay there and not be a part of housing, right? You recognize it as super important. So I also work for Urban Hope, and to John's point, we definitely are seeing gentrification, and a piece of that is great, and like having new resources come into the community, but unless we are vigilant about finding ways for current residents to stay and benefit from the changes that are coming into the neighborhood, and participating in the character and the vibrancy that they helped build and create in those neighborhoods, then we're missing the boat, right? I also think it's important that affordable housing organizations continue to come together and rally around affordable housing within the city. And I also think it's important to be mindful of this changing landscape and what affordable housing and supports are going to need to look like in the counties as well. As more and more of our people are being displaced and are moving, and things are shifting and changing, it is going to take a regional focus on making sure that wherever you live, that there's access, right, for whoever would want to be there, and that we've provided opportunities for that level of mobility or stability, depending on what that family desires.
You might tell them about one thing that's being done right now by the community land.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the strategies that we are excited to take advantage of is a community land trust, which is going to be focused in Churchill. It is a strategy that has been used in other communities across the country, where land is actually owned by a community organization. It helps preserve affordability for homeowners moving forward. So that is one of the many strategies that's being implemented specifically for Churchill that we're excited about.
Thank you so much.
Yes, the question over here. Actually, I have an observation and then a question. In looking at the various maps, one of the things I noticed is sort of the environmental justice issues that these seem to map over. And to try to put it politely, stuff flows downhill. So historically, for many years, I know that wealthier people who could afford to live upstream where the water's cleaner. You think about where the water treatment plant and the sewage treatment plants are in Richmond. So the areas of poverty seem to map pretty closely over these areas where there's affluent, where there are brownfields and so on. And so I would think that looking at ways to address this has to include looking at ways to redevelop and revitalize those areas that have been damaged through environmental neglect or worse.
Oh, absolutely. Those of you who know the history of public housing in Richmond know, of course, that it was concentrated in the East End. Some of you may not know, however, that a good chunk of that public housing, including schools, were located on landfills. And so you've got methane gases coming up. You're exactly right. This kind of what's often called environmental racism, where those who are most subject to the kind of environment that's not healthy. Big case in point right now, we're all reading about Flint, Michigan. That is not an exception. This is all across the country. But yes, when we start thinking about redevelopment, we've got to address those environmental issues, that's for sure.
So, John, my question is with a separate one, and that is, given the current state of growth and development in the Richmond region, it strikes me that it would be very interesting and informative to include Hanover County at least in these maps. And I'm wondering why it's left out and whether you thought about including it.
Oh, in fact, Hanover is included just for this presentation. We just had Chesterfield, Henrico, and Richmond. We do have Hanover for all of the indicators. And probably looking back, I should have included Hanover. I think the reason that I wanted just to focus on these 3 jurisdictions is that that's where you see more clearly the magnitude of the extension of poverty. But Hanover County also is experiencing an increase in poverty. You're exactly right, and probably would have been good to include Hanover. How are we doing on time?
We're done. I'm sorry, we've all been cut off, but one more?
One more question.
One more question. Yes, sir.
I'm actually one of those who live in Hanover County.
Okay.
But my question is this, I know you talked about the commercialization, that you're gonna do a study of that. And my question is, when you do your commercialization, do you suspect that if you break out grocery stores, will that be an indicator of where poverty is not? Because I know where I live, I'm about 2 minutes to 10 minutes away from 4 grocery stores. But I know that in the city where I volunteer at different places, you have to go a little longer. And even the same, and I noticed behind the companies, the same company may own a group of grocery stores, but that group doesn't show up in one area, but they show up in another area. So I'm wondering if that's something you suspect that you would see.
Yes. They're called food deserts, as we know. Oh my goodness, yes. I wish somebody here from the Department of Social Service, Department of Health. I heard an interesting figure the other day, and don't quote me on this. I will just simply say generally, I don't have the exact figures, but millions, plural, millions of dollars are lost from places like Churchill. Talking about food stamp money. If that money could be captured within the community, just captured, and if it were to circulate within the community, that would do a heap of good. But there is this enormous leakage because there are no grocery stores. And so people who are needing to buy a lot of groceries and what they're needing is just not available in the corner markets, they'll use their food stamps in a grocery store someplace distant. And often, you know this, people will walk to those grocery stores. Many of them are elderly people, and they're carrying these bags of groceries back to their place. And one thing that the Office of Community Wealth Building is doing, and this is so important, is building employment, small businesses over time, so that that money will circulate within the community. One more question. Yes, sir.
Can I make a comment about food deserts? I'm the CEO of Feedmore.
Oh, CEO.
I'm blessed to be the CEO of Feedmore. So we feed those folks. 20 million pounds of food last year. Go to 205,000 citizens who aren't sure the next meal is coming from. That's over 29 counties and 5 cities, but Richmond is a very significant part of that. There's the good news. A fellow named Jim Scanlon, who worked for Martin's, worked for U-Crops, is starting some stores, Jim's Local Markets, in now Newport News. That city did a fantastic job of wooing him, getting him some space, providing him a building to lease back to him. It's for profit, and Jim knows what he's doing. He wants to do more of that. He's very interested in Richmond, has been for some time. I won't go through that story. But there's hope. In the legislature, we just tried to put through and requested $10 billion for seed money for retail grocery stores in food deserts, both urban and rural. The Senate put in $2.5 million, the House put in nothing, and we ended up without getting any money this year, but a lot of education about food deserts and the importance of that and the importance of the economy. And to your very point, how that food stamp money and employment, Jim intends to hire from within the neighborhood of Newport News, trade. The social services groups have been with him, and we have great hopes he'll bring that to Richmond, particularly on perhaps the East End. But a lot of folks are becoming aware of need, and there are some ideas to put for-profit stores in there and have a market-driven system that can work. That along with some government assistance and citizens who support Feed More, I think we're on our way to make progress in these areas. Lord knows we need to. Thank you.
Let's all give a round of applause.
This is one of many wonderful nonprofit organizations. We are really blessed in this city with a network of strong nonprofit organizations, and that is one of them. And I have gotten the hook. I'm getting off the stage. But I want to thank my students again. Thank you.
Thank you all for, as always, an incredibly compelling presentation, more resources for us to use as a region as we continue to grapple with these historic issues and create some lasting, sustainable change. In a moment, we are going to take a 10-minute break, and there are a few things that we're going to be doing during that time. One is if you have not yet put a dot up on the map in the back indicating where you live or work, please make sure to do that. We want to get a sense of who is here in the room and where there are some gaps, where we need to do some targeted outreach and engagement. Also, during the break, we are going to be coming around and putting some index cards on each of the chairs, so you're welcome to stay at your seat, but we will be putting some index cards that will be part of our next session. And coming right after the break, we have a presentation from Dr. Thad Williamson about the great work being done from the Office of Community Wealth Building. So please don't use this as a chance to sneak out. You'll want to hear what Dr. Williamson has to say, and that will happen in 10 minutes. Thank you.
As folks are getting settled again and getting refills on coffee and water and coming back in from the hallway, John mentioned that this was a program that was done on a very limited budget a few times, and we are grateful to those who did invest in Unpacking the Census, particularly the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, as well as the Community Foundation serving Richmond and Central Virginia, who both invested in this program and made sure that there was the staff capacity as well as the technological support to be able to produce the DVDs, to train the facilitators, and to make sure that the information was disseminated as widely as possible. Our next speaker, the index cards that you have will be for the discussions following our next speaker, but you've heard a lot about the Office of Community Wealth Building already. There's a lot of great news to report and also some priorities of things that are still to come. And so it's my pleasure now to welcome to the stage Dr. Thad Williamson, who serves as Director of the Office of Community Wealth Building, and he's on leave from my alma mater, the Jefferson School at the University of Richmond. Dr. Williamson.
Good morning. Good morning. There's still like all the space in the first few rows. Those who are standing, come up. So there we go. So my job is to take some time to give you an overview of what the Office of Community Wealth Building has done so far, and then more importantly, talk about the future directions and priorities, and sort of close with what role citizens will need to play in making this continue to happen going forward. And then I'm going to put on the spot Tori Edmonds-Howell to shine a little spotlight on our Radiant Future, which is one of the key programs, to talk for a few minutes about what's going on in the city's high school, because it's such a promising example of collaboration between the city and the school system. Okay, so just an overview, our top 10 greatest hits since 2014, where we're going, how we're going to get there, and how you can help. When I was hiring staff, I wanted people who had different skills than me and also would be very honest. And I'm terrible at PowerPoints, and I had staff who were honest enough to let me know that was the case. So that's a good credit to Risha Berry and Christina Mastroianni in helping put this particular presentation together. So this is definitely an upgrade over what has come out of me in the past. So, all right. So this is an overview, and I will go through them one by one. So first, the big thing, and this is obviously what Mayor Jones stressed, creating an agency is kind of a big deal. And the Office of Community Wealth Building was formed as a unit within the Department of Human Services, which is something the mayor sort of has administrative authority to do. That's how it started. But there was a concern, first of all, to make sure that the unit would have longevity past the current administration, and secondly, that had the proper place, the proper location. Because the Office of Community Wealth Building is not intended to become a vast new agency. It's never going to have as many people as, say, social services or anything close to it. Rather, it's about being a strategic hub to be able to tie together all the resources that the city has, many of which are already in place. And so what's really, really important is that not only has it been codified as an agency and the money has been moved around so that there's centralized control over those funds which are within the city, but also it's been placed so that by ordinance, it gives policy advice to the mayor and reports operationally to the chief administrative officer. And within the city bureaucracy, that's extremely important. And Mayor Jones and our CEO, Celine Covey-Flynn, they've really taken this under the wings since Ms. Covey-Flynn has been on. She's made it a clear priority. And that's a really important relationship because it allows us to think strategically across the entire city and work across agencies. So it codifies that role. Also has, the ordinance also established accountability measures. So if you were paying attention to city council a few weeks ago, you saw something that almost never happens, which is the mayor directly addressed council at length. And the next mayor is going to have to do that too, every single year, by March 1 of each year, to give an update to the council and of course the city at large on our progress in building community wealth and overcoming poverty. There's also an annual report that the office produces that has to be submitted each year, and the first one of those was also delivered to the city council just a few weeks ago. Okay. The second is that it's not just an office, but there's a strategy behind it. And we'll get to more than nuts and bolts out later, but when this was set up, the thought was, let's put something in place that can move the ball forward meaningfully on all 5 of the major priorities identified by the Anti-Poverty Commission, which were workforce development, targeted job creation, that's creating jobs that are going to be accessible to the people we're trying to reach, regional transportation, developing a cradle to college and beyond, or career and beyond educational pipeline, and then a commitment to public housing redevelopment with a firm commitment to no involuntary displacement of residents. And then setting long-term goals and metrics, something to aim for, something to provide direction, and as time goes on, something that we can evaluate progress against. And as the mayor said, this is extremely ambitious, what we put out there, which is what would it take to actually reduce child poverty by 1/2 in 15 years. That seems like a lot, but again, it's 7,500 kids, which is, just not that many people. You can get your head around a number like that. And we've also established a series of intermediate metrics, things like housing affordability, percentage of people employed full-time, percent graduating on time, percent of kids showing up in kindergarten, doing well, prepared to learn to read, things of that nature, which will help us track how we're doing in the short-term period. Because it does take a while to definitively show that the poverty has changed. And, and so we have to look at some intermediate metrics as well. 4 new programs have been established in different areas under the direct influence or role of the Office of Community Wealth Building, 2 of which are actually internal to the city and 2 of which are with external partners. The BLISS program, I believe Sandy, you want to stand real quick, and Derek. And they are working with families hands-on to provide not just support in getting to work, but looking at all the obstacles that prevent someone or may prevent someone from being successful in keeping that job once you get it, and looking at the child care situation, looking at the transportation needs,
They deal with some incredibly complicated situations day in and day out. They help those involved navigate the bureaucracies, whether it be the schools, the housing authority, the development relationships all over town, and really being that service connector. Right now, 20 families enrolled. We're hoping to get to 35 or 40 by the end of the year. And that's really, in some ways, our core program. What does it take to holistically move an entire family out of poverty? So that's new. RBA reads, I don't know if Barbara is here. Yes, Barbara, you understand? She is reaching literally every pre-K student in the city of Richmond every single month with a reading program that's distributing books, and has brought in a small army of volunteers, in each of the pre-K centers to do a monthly reading and have books to send home, as well as education material for parents. And that's an army you want to continue to grow, right? So it's, the Good Neighbor Initiative, Kelly, I think, is here. You understand? Any from your team are here? Okay. So what the Good Neighbor Initiative is actually, it was actually one of the most interesting recommendations that came out of the citizens-based planning process. We had public housing residents saying that there's a real need for community navigators, for people to be connectors to resources and help residents navigate the system. There's also concern with, as public housing redevelopment changes coming, having a mechanism to get information out to residents long before the change actually happens, so people can prepare. And so that's a team of actually 6 people, and Kelly's a full-time supervisor. It's 6 part-time employees, all based at the City Health District, 1 in each of the major public housing communities. And then RBA Future, and I'll talk to Tori a little bit later, but in brief, that's our college and career access program that started in the high schools this year. Okay, we've expanded the investment in workforce development. So last year, nearly 300 people went through the Center for Workforce Innovation, which is located right across from City Hall. It's by the temporary transfer station. Over 175 people got employed. The goal is to build that really to something that can reach 1,000 a year. And that doesn't just mean people coming to that particular center. It means growing it, probably establishing satellite centers, and also building relationships with the other, or strengthening the relationships with the other workforce providers. So Valerie Mitchell is here somewhere, or what? You're gonna stand up? So she's our newest employee. She started 2 weeks ago as the workforce administrator, and there are a number of members of her team here, and also from the DSS staff, and Science C. Leslie, you must stand also. So these are the folks actually getting the work done, helping people find jobs day in and day out. And probably this is the most important piece of work anyone's doing in the city of Richmond right now. And again, the center has been very successful in the past, building innovative partnerships. The welding program, it's a partnership with RPS and Strickland Machine Company. There's a new partnership with Capital One. There's a partnership with United Way and Liz in the Neighborhood Resource Center. I see Cheryl here. So that down in Fulton. And so there's a lot of neat stuff happening, and it needs to continue to grow. Okay. We built, as an office, really strong partnerships with Richmond Public Schools and the Housing Authority in particular. And by strong, I mean that we meet these people every week. It's not an occasional relationship, it's a pretty deep relationship. It's a relationship of trust, and I think it's significant. We've shown it's possible to do that. And just as a relative or total newcomer to city government, to witness the conversations that happen when people who are working in related areas but aren't working together learn about what each other is doing. It's really powerful. And so that collaboration led to the RBA feature. It's leading to some of the important work in early childhood. And then with the Housing Authority, this program that Kelly is doing, that would be possible without their relationship. And certainly the work we're trying to do in the East End wouldn't be possible. Richmond City Health District, again, has been a great partner, and we are also involved to a small but important degree in the BRT project through GRTC. Okay, then there's also the wider community. So this is agencies intended to be not just a city agency and not just working with the public sector, but trying to tie together the resources of the entire community. Because we know the local public sector honestly doesn't have all the resources required to get this done on the scale we need to get it done. And likewise, hopefully it's a welcome thing for those in the university, in the universities and the philanthropic community, the foundations and so forth, to have a place to go to find out what's going on in terms of city priorities with respect to these issues. And so we've had regular conversations with a number of these groups when we continue to deepen these relationships over time, as well as with the business community and the nonprofits. Okay, we have received a major grant from a national funder, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, which has already opened up other doors, and it's certainly one of our priorities this year to try to build on that. And that work was for early childhood specifically, but they were actually really interested in the entire thing. And again, that's significant and a necessary part of what needs to happen. Okay. Institutionalizing the citizen's voice in the process. So, well, Tina Grego, who's here, actually documented this, but the actual plan of implementing was filtered through, reviewed by a citizens advisory board that existed informally, but had a very important role in the planning process. That's now a formal body of the city of Richmond. It's been up and running for about a year. It had a good meeting last night, and we provided or developed a mechanism by which policymakers, the agency, can get regular feedback and hear. And I love it, as was the case last night, when the staff just sitting back and listening for a long time. So Lily is here today. I don't see anyone else here, but Lily, please stand, because she's been part of this process all the way through from the very beginning. Yeah, and then hello, my staff. All right, so what are we actually doing? So the goal is building community wealth. And the question that came up earlier actually was quite helpful, because it is a question: what causes poverty versus what causes wealth? And the analysis that we did is important. So you hear it said, and it's not wrong, that education is the single biggest thing. And certainly the school system is the single biggest agency in town touching families in poverty. It's indisputable, right? But ultimately, poverty is about money. You have to have that education has to pay off with a job at the end of it. So to really move the needle, that's where we have to start. And so we're saying employment is at the center of the strategy. But certainly in the long term, education plays into it. If you have more credentials and hopefully you actually learn more, you'll be better prepared to get a job. And as a community as a whole, has a reputation for having a well-educated workforce. That certainly helps in attracting and retaining businesses. Likewise, the housing environment is very, very important. So when you grow up and you don't have many connections to people around you who are working, when information about jobs is not getting to your neighborhood, and there's not a job nearby, and there's not a bus line to take you to where there's a job, you're stuck. And that has really been the reality of a large part of the community in Richmond. Most people get a job because they know somebody. And if you're shut off from the social networks, you're severely disadvantaged. And most people today,
probably not well known, almost half the people who live in the city of Richmond actually work outside. You know, and many of the jobs, that actually the majority of jobs in the city of Richmond is somebody who doesn't live here. So there's back and forth commuting all the time, but because they don't have that regional system, if you're not living immediately near employment and you don't have a car, then you're really shut out of that. Okay. And so what the Office of Community Wealth Building is trying to do is to push constructive change on all three of these levers. And certainly employment is the first one, but obviously education and housing too. And so the theory of change here is, as we succeed in building community wealth, that will reinforce positive changes in the schools and in the housing environment. Okay? You know, in my opinion, almost nothing would help the schools succeed more than having a significant number of parents in our highest poverty schools have jobs and steady employment and family stability. Okay. And if that doesn't happen, all the other strategies probably only going to take you so far. Okay. So, Mayor Jones mentioned this goal of reducing poverty overall by 40%. Really, you're talking about 17,000 to 18,000 people. Probably, if you can get 10,000 adults and you'll get the kids with them, and you'll get that number. So if you break it down, how can we go about building a capacity as a city to permanently move a net of 1,000 people a year out of poverty? Now that's a huge lift. And by net, I mean, I assume that in any given time period, some people above the line are going to fall below, right? This is the way it works. People are constantly in flux, and we have to pay attention to those happening above the poverty line. So I'm glad John Muser mentioned double poverty line, because that is really what we consider to be the target, is everybody who's under double poverty line, which is actually the majority of families in the city of Richmond. They may not be in poverty now, but they're at risk. So we have to build both security for those who are above the line at a given time, as well as, you know, pathways forward for those who are below. So if you build that capacity and sustain it for 10 years, we do have a real chance of hitting this goal. Okay. And the primary engine, again, is that workforce center, along with Bliss. And really, Bliss started as a pilot program. We wanted to kind of see if we could provide as much intensive support as possible. What does it actually take to move a family out of poverty? And this is informed not just by, this is a nice thing to do, it's informed by an awareness that there are real barriers that people face. Real disincentives built in, where you're earning more, but something is taken away from you. Okay, you know, these are all actually by design. It's the pilot, it probably will not continue this way forever, but by pilot, all the families are actually public housing residents. And you have to think for a minute, get your head around the leap of faith it takes to think for a family that has secure housing to actually be serious about developing a strategy for getting out of that. Because there's a risk involved, and certainly a fear factor. And it's probably not a wise thing to do if you don't have certain things in place first. So what the caseworkers are doing is have taken a methodical approach to specific the needs of each household to figure out what is your strategy for building yourself to the point where this is a realistic and a positive step for you that's going to be sustainable once you exit. And I believe that one family has already made that step, and perhaps it'll be more in 2016. But to me, it's more important to have to be prepared to do it fast. Okay. So that's the primary engine. And if you don't build this motor successfully, the rest of it won't work so well. But at the same time, we're also looking at transformational strategies that can actually, I mean, this is bold, but we're trying to shift the structure of opportunity in the city of Richmond. And I'll go through these one by one. Regional transit, certainly probably the best place to start. So this is a sketch of accessible and inaccessible jobs along sort of the major trunkways in the Richmond metropolitan area. And the vision that the Anti-Poverty Commission put out was, what would happen if you actually built accessible public transit along each of these four pathways?
And the estimate is about 128,000 jobs that are now inaccessible by public transit would become accessible. And then if you also assume there'd be associated feeder patterns, we could be from being, number 92 in public transit nationally out of the top 100 to being actually in the top half, if not top third. Okay, so this is a realistic vision. The Broad Street line is the first step, hugely significant. The Supervisor Nelson just tosses out casually, oh yeah, we're thinking about putting the bus out the short bus. And that's a really big deal, a really big deal. And even just a few years ago, people didn't imagine that kind of step happening. But I think the BRT has helped change the conversation and is a slightly different model of public transit that perhaps can pull in new riders, but really its main purpose is to be the first leg, the bedrock, in building a system to get people who need to use public transit to employment eventually throughout the entire region. Okay, R-rate feature again, I'll postpone to Toria, but let me talk about where this came from for just a second. So right now what it is career and college counseling centers with a dedicated staff member in each of the 5 comprehensive high schools. The vision is to get to a point where not only every high school student graduates with a plan, but there's actually dedicated financial resources that the community has provided, in other words, scholarships, available to every student who graduates Richmond Public Schools. So we did a feasibility study. It depends on how expensive it is, what the rules are. The estimate is probably $45 million a year. You can get something meaningful off the ground to guarantee support for all students to go on to at least a community college. And if you want to get more ambitious, it would take more resources. So RPS Education Foundation is actually the institutional host of this, and we're continuing to be in conversation with them about how to move that scholarship piece on the ground, probably with some sort of phase-in. But that's the vision, and other communities have done this nationally, and it's shown it does help draw students back in to an urban school system, creating a more diverse population. And it also does help improve academic outcomes. But the most important thing is to lift the aspirations, a sense of what's possible, and the expectations, and frankly, the school culture. Okay. Come back to that one, because that's the hardest one. The hardest one last. Okay, social enterprise. Is Yvette here? Stand up, because, all right. Yvette is the first person in the history of the city of Richmond to hold the job title of social enterprise specialist. And what she has been working on is twofold. First, we have the picture of the Conrad Center up because the city did acquire this building in the fall with the thought in mind of launching a meaningful workforce development, eventually social enterprise model in the area of town that, frankly, all the negative stuff has always been, to try to put something positive in that particular location on Oliver Hill Way. So Yvette is working on that. I'm not going to spill her beans too much, but we'll look for some news on that pretty soon. And then she's also working with a nationally known organization, the Democracy Collaborative, to actually talk to the anchor institutions, the big universities, the hospital systems, and say, look, you have all this money flowing through this town. This is not a poor community in the aggregate. It's poor because of the distribution of resources, but there's a lot of wealth here. And there's a lot of goodwill. If you combine wealth and goodwill and an intelligent plan, we should be able to make something happen to connect those everyday flow of resources in ways that actually benefit people in the communities. And so the idea is, what if some of those contracts were directed to support startup social enterprises that are committing to hiring people out of poverty? Okay, and they've been doing really good work and some interesting plans, so stay tuned for that. That just has to get done this year. I'll back up. Didn't want to duck this, but this is big. So right now, the city of Richmond and the Richmond Redevelopment Housing Authority are working together
to apply for a Choice Neighborhoods grant from Department of Housing and Urban Development, potentially a $30 million grant, with the intention of transforming Creighton Court, 140 units of public housing, into a mixed income community, eventually at least 1,200 units of housing created either on site at the old Armstrong High School site or at other locations in the city of Richmond, with a guarantee of 1-for-1 housing replacement, so we know everybody has a place to go, and also with a high degree of intentionality in terms of, first of all, nobody's going to move until something new has been built, the build first model. Yeah, and secondly, everyone who does move and is impacted by the process is going to have support services in place. And I take this very, very seriously, because this is, all the other things we're doing are nice things to do. This is something we don't do well, actually can cause harm. So I take it very seriously. And TK, Salman, and I have been meeting almost constantly since he took over that role, and there's a whole team of people within the city working on this project. What's the most important to know is that also the residents are engaged. And there's something called the Resident Leadership Transformation Team, consisting of Creighton residents that grew out of an earlier effort. It also has support from me, the 10 council leaders, to make sure there's citizen voice in that process. And they're going to be at the table as that specific plan gets developed. So that is the single biggest project. We're just one player in it, but it is an important piece of the larger puzzle. Okay. So that's program. And now there's also another phase of, besides the specific things we're working on, there's also a broader chain we're trying to be part of, which is when Richmond goes to get or try to get support from other places, especially from the federal government, get dinged over and over because we're not working together effectively. And that's certainly one of our goals. And likewise, some of these things, like early childhood, it's just a dizzying array of people at the table. And there is no one nerve center. And there's some benefits to that, but there are also a lot of drawbacks. So, we can't just say the answer to every problem is start a new program, because there's a good chance that program is out there somewhere already. It's a matter of tying it together. That said, once you've done the survey, once you've done the resource map, the needs assessment, all that stuff, the likelihood is you are going to find some areas that are major needs. I think early childhood is, without question, one of them. The resident survey that was done in Creighton Court in 2014 found about 3 in 4 of the kids that are under 5 were not enrolled in a program. And then you map that out, okay, what's going on at Woodville Elementary School and their scores? What happens to MLK, on and on. It starts there, in a sense. So if you don't intervene there, how are we going to get better outcomes 15 years down the road, like you're talking about? So in that case, there's probably a much bigger need than our resource at the table, but you can't just rest and say, well, we can't do anything about that. You have to work to build a plan to get those resources. And the best plan is to work collaboratively and show you're all pulling together with as many people as possible on board, because that's what the people on the outside want to see and will demand. So early childhood is certainly one area we're doing a lot of work on. Health is another, again, involved with the City Health District and other partners, and pursuing some grant opportunities. And over time, we haven't made as much progress on this, but certainly economic development as well, as we look into building the money model for social enterprise and for other things. There are some neat things that are happening in economic development, particularly around the port. The fact that we have this office has been helpful with. We have no role in the port deal as such, other than to say it was a priority, but we will have a role in making sure that as the jobs come into the port, that our people are getting them through the workforce there. And that has been, another critical project for the community. Finally, last, and then I'll wrap up in terms of Tori for a couple minutes, is what role do citizens play in this and need to play? And I may have to go all soapbox for a minute or two at some point, so bear with me. But yeah, and in some way, get the question all the time, how can we get involved? And certainly,
the city of Richmond is ripe for opportunities to get directly involved. If you want to help a child or a family in difficult circumstances, there's plenty of opportunities. There's just one, Peter Paul Development Center put out a call this last week. They're one of the most respected organizations in the city, and yet they don't have enough people to mentor all the kids in our program. And that's a slam dunk. Why isn't that happening? Right? So there are things like that. Certainly, the employment piece, if you have access to jobs, if you're an employer thinking about being intentional about who you're hiring, coming to the city, the workforce center can help screen people, can help prepare people. But beyond that, we need to build a strong network of employment referrals that's citywide. Because you're talking about most people get a job because they know somebody. Well, if we put together all the people who know somebody into an organized network, we can make some progress pretty quickly without probably a huge expenditure of money. And again, I think that would be something that citizens could take a lead role in. The accountability measures that were put in place, talked about at the beginning in terms of the mayor making annual report, this office making an annual report, is really important, but doesn't mean anything if the citizens don't take it seriously. Okay, so that's just a general point. But beyond that, the advocacy that takes place on poverty has to be informed, and it has to recognize the starting point, the deep structural disadvantages the city has. We don't have the money to do all the things that everybody would like to do all the time. That's just a fact. And, you know, I've seen these budget things for several years, and it's challenging. There are difficult trade-offs that need to be made, but if you don't have a baseline understanding of what a whole the city is compared to, say, Henrico County, or some of our other places that have a better fiscal base and are getting more money in the state for schools, proportionally, we have to take the advocacy to places that have actually the resources to drive change, which in my opinion is the Commonwealth and the federal level, especially the Commonwealth. That said, at the local level, the way to make stuff happen, I think we've all learned, is to take a constructive problem-solving approach. I don't think there's an elected official in the city of Richmond who doesn't want to see work like this advance. And I can't imagine there will be many in the future. But how to get it done, given the constraints, given the challenges, is not always obvious, but it takes a lot of persistence and goodwill and patience. And sort of a politics of shame will not get it done. So I will close off my soapbox on that note and hand it over to Toria to talk about what's going on in our future, and then obviously we can take some questions.
Good morning everyone. My name is Toria Evans-Howe, and I'm the program manager for RVA Future. As Thad stated earlier, RVA Future is a new college and career access program that operates in the 5 comprehensive high schools of RPS. It's a collaborative initiative between Richmond Public Schools, the Office of Community Wealth Building, and the RPS Education Foundation. And what we've done is we've established college and career centers within the 5 schools, which are designated spaces for the delivery of services. So if you go into Armstrong, Huguenot, George Wythe, John Marshall, Thomas Jefferson, you'll be able to locate one of the future centers. They are staffed by full-time center directors, whose primary role is to not only deliver services to students, but also to coordinate the various post-secondary planning partners who are already in place and that continue to come on board. Within the schools, we do not operate under a cohort-based model, so we're servicing the entire school 9th through 12th grade with the intentions of making sure that every student has a dynamic and actionable plan upon graduation. Our primary work falls into about 4 different categories. We're working with students to learn more about themselves, what their interests are, what their strengths are, where their passions lie. Working with students to explore the various options that align with those interests, passions, and strengths. working with students to then create a plan to put something into motion, and then of course making that plan real. So some of the work on the day-to-day basis within the centers includes the center directors and other service providers working with students on completing college applications, writing scholarship essays, SAT prep, going on college and industry tours, researching what high demand jobs are out there. So very comprehensive, working with students to make sure that they're able to answer that question, what's next? When you walk across the stage, receive your diploma, what are you going on to? To date, we've worked with a little over 1,200 students across the 5 schools, 9th through 12th grade. We're sitting at about 5,000 students, and so we're right around 26%, but averaging 70% of seniors being met with. So as the college application and scholarship and financial aid season dies down for our seniors, we're really going to shift that focus to working with more underclassmen to make sure that we're having those early conversations about what can be really exciting work. Thad shared a lot about the prospects of offering a promise scholarship for students. A lot of the feedback that we get from students and just sitting and working with them is that, you know, that financial aspect is one of those barriers that just prevents them from wanting to take that step to even consider. And so within our current model, we're working really heavily with Bridging Richmond on the FAFSA completion project to increase FAFSA completions across the school, as well as looking for those local scholarships, national scholarships, and essentially hand-holding the students through the process of getting those dollars. So we're really excited about what we're doing in the schools, really excited about the collaboration. I'll speak to that a little bit. Given the fact that we're working with, you know, thousands and thousands of students, we alone cannot do it. So within the centers, we've pulled together the various post-secondary partners to work in a very collaborative and coordinated way. So within the centers, we have the Reynolds Community College Career Coaches, Virginia College Advising Corps Advisors out of UVA, JMU Professor in Residences, who am I missing? The AmeriCorps ACE program, which dedicate at least 2 full-time AmeriCorps service members to operate out of the schools, GRAS Financial Aid Advisors, and then again, we're working to supplement and working in tandem with the school counselors. So it's a very collaborative effort. We're all talking and walking the same language with the ultimate goal of making sure that every student is positioned to not enter into a pipeline of poverty, but one of prosperity.
So Toria was hired, I think, late July, and within 6 weeks had hired 5 people, developed a work plan. Within 3 months, had a work plan for all the providers, and got the superintendent and his staff to endorse it. So it's pretty good work. So 5 minutes, and those some questions.
Got a question here. I'm sure all of us are quite impressed with the work that you're doing and with the support you're getting from our city administration. The only caution I have is, even though the counties do not have an office comparable to what you have, how optimistic are you and cautious are you that we will eventually reduce that kind of lack of cooperation to advance the regional breakdown and reduction in poverty? It appears to me that says, in order to achieve your goals, there has to be an improved amount of regional cooperation. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Well, certainly, and that's another area I should have mentioned. First of all, advocacy. I think it starts with the citizen voice in those counties. And I'll go back to something I was meant to say, but was too emotional to say. When I first came to Richmond in 2005, John Meeser told me, or I heard him say, the story of Richmond is the story of America. And I thought that was actually just local propaganda, so I just And then I read an article published by this newspaper, a very authoritative account of who ran Richmond, and they actually identify a very tight-knit group of people, and it seemed to be pretty accurate, and they were a pretty homogenous group of people, and it's pretty limited diversity in terms of leadership at the county level too. So much has changed at this time, and we're at a very fluid moment in our city and regional's history, which is cause for a lot of anxiety, but it's also, I think we're at a great small D democratic moment. I mean, frankly, no one has any idea who's going to be the mayor, right? And that's going to be scary, but it's an opportunity for citizens to really push things that are important. So I'm optimistic, particularly about Henrico County. If you look demographically, it's almost a microcosm of the entire country. And I think that change is starting to be reflected in the attitudes of their elected leaders. And so I think where it starts is probably first baby steps. You know, the director of this office could have a regular meeting with someone, corresponding agency, even if it's not called community development. There's no reason that couldn't happen. You don't have to pass a law to do that. But second, probably more important, is mutual learning. So if what, say, Sandy is next to you is doing with Bliss, it's of value, there are probably people from Henrico and Chesterfield who could benefit from something like that too. So that's a learning opportunity. Or likewise, if the future center strategies, as it pays off, there's no reason Henrico couldn't have something like that as well. But really, the heavy part is going to be, I think, about inclusive housing, because and it's not widely understood. A lot of the bad things that happened in Richmond in the past are actually no longer possible under federal law. So we can't redevelop public housing and say everyone's going to the county unless the county has public transportation. The law will not allow you to do that. New housing has to be accessible by public transit. Okay. Well, that's a question. In the long term, will Henrico, or how, I think will eventually, but how quickly will they embrace that? How quickly will they embrace inclusionary housing policies? The fact you got somebody from Chesterfield who was here talking in depth and knowledge about that this morning is, I think, incredibly promising. It would have happened in Richmond 10 years ago. So fast forward the clock, I'm optimistic if the people in this room make it happen.
So Thad, you talked about collaboration being so important. There's a lot of folks who do a lot of good work. The question I have, it seems to me that the execution, leadership of the execution, project management, that can make things happen. There's a lot of great hearts, a lot of great efforts. What would you say for the creation or the group that's put together creating a center of excellence around this process of practice of collective impact? And or project management skill sets, leadership skill sets. I'm in the nonprofit world. I came from the profit world for 35 years. And that's exactly what we did, getting people the tools, the structures, the frameworks, how to execute. So your opinion on that idea of giving folks those tools and somehow helping our leaders draw collaboration and have a plan.
Well, I think that would be most welcome. And I think a lot of this is about collective impact, but writ large, right? And I do think we are going to need some coaching and guidance, because none of us here have completely figured out how to do that, but I think the will is already there. It's more exactly how to. So if you have resources or ideas about specifics in the coaching, yeah, I think it's a good time. One more question?